Colonel Andreas von Aulock looked at his watch. It was just after 9 a.m., August 17th, 1944. Outside his bunker walls, the American artillery had stopped. The silence was heavier than the noise. For more than a week, the guns had screamed without pause. Day and night, the sound never stopped. The ground had trembled continuously. The shells had come in waves, each wave lasting hours. The fortress shook. Dust fell from the ceiling like snow. Men covered their ears. Some went deaf from the constant percussion. Now, there was nothing. Complete silence. Just wind. Just the sound of his own breathing inside the thick concrete walls. Von Aulock was not afraid. He had calculated the physics with precision. His 10-foot thick concrete roof could withstand any shell the US Army possessed. High explosives would bounce off his fortress like hail on stone. He had radioed Berlin with confidence. "The citadel stands. We will hold forever." But von Aulock had made a fatal error. He had prepared for a war of physics, of steel hitting stone, of kinetic energy meeting concrete. He did not know that at that very moment, American P-38 Lightnings were diving towards him, carrying a weapon that ignored every law of ballistics he had ever learned. A weapon that didn't break walls. A weapon that weaponized fire itself. Andreas von Aulock was not a fanatic. He was a professional. Born in Silesia in 1893, he had spent 37 years in the German army. 37 years. More than half his lifetime. He wore a monocle, carried a cane, and treated war as a mathematical equation. He did not believe in the Reich's ideology. He believed in duty, in orders, in the chain of command. In the First World War, he had learned the brutal mathematics of trench warfare. Thousands dying for meters of mud. He had survived that. He understood sacrifice. Later, in the Second World War, he had commanded under Rommel himself in North Africa. He had learned from the greatest tactical mind in the German army. He had earned the Knight's Cross for his leadership of the Kuban bridgehead, a position so strong that Soviet attacks shattered against German discipline and engineering. Wave after wave of Soviet assaults, and they never broke. He was not a man who broke. Yesterday, August 16th, he received the most prestigious honor of his life, the oak leaves to his Knight's Cross, the highest award he could receive. The Führer himself had authorized the promotion. The eyes of the Reich were watching him. He was the hero of the Atlantic Wall. His name was in dispatches. His fortress was formidable. The ancient citadel of Saint-Malo, reinforced with 10 feet of concrete. Underground, a honeycomb of tunnels, carefully designed and engineered. Multiple layers of defense. Machine gun positions interlocked for overlapping fields of fire. Artillery positions built into hillsides overlooking the bay. Years of construction. Thousands of tons of concrete. He had approximately 3,000 combat soldiers in the citadel itself. Not recruits. Hardened men. Veterans of the Eastern Front warfare. Men who had fought at Stalingrad. Men who understood sacrifice. The Americans had pounded him for more than a week with every gun they possessed. 8-inch howitzers, 240mm guns, medium bombers dropping high explosives. 8,000 shells, perhaps more. The result? Dust, ringing ears, structural damage to some outer buildings, but no breaches, no way in. The citadel stood, intact, defiant. By the morning of August 17th, von Aulock felt not merely confident, he felt certain. The Americans were stalled. Their infantry was bleeding out in the streets above, fighting house to house. He had already survived one direct assault into the inner courtyard. The Americans had reached the heart of the fortress with 30 men, and found only rubble, only confusion. They had found no way forward, and had retreated. He believed he had beaten American firepower. He believed that stone and concrete and German engineering had proven superior to anything the Americans possessed. He believed the fortress would hold for weeks, months perhaps, until relief came, or until new orders. He was wrong. The Americans hadn't run out of shells. They had switched weapons entirely. They had switched from the ordnance department to something else, something new, something he did not understand, and von Aulock was about to learn a lesson that would reshape modern warfare forever. Time: 11:30 a.m., August 17th, 1944. The sound changed. The nature of the attack changed fundamentally. Not the heavy drone of B-24 bombers flying high, not the scream of artillery from miles away, the high-pitched whine of twin-engine fighters, diving, close, lower than normal. P-38 Lightnings. Von Aulock's spotters called it in. Fighter bombers inbound, multiple aircraft approaching from the north. Von Aulock scoffed from his command post. Fighter bombers carried small 500-pound bombs, firecrackers against his fortress. His concrete had already survived week-long bombardment from 8-inch guns. What threat could small bombs pose? But something was wrong with these aircraft. They were flying much lower than normal, perhaps 2,000 feet, descending. And under their wings, they weren't carrying bombs in the traditional sense. They were carrying massive, teardrop-shaped tanks, external fuel tanks, 165 gallons each. Modified. Unusual. Von Aulock watched from his observation position. Fuel tanks? The Americans were dropping fuel tanks at his fortress? What was the logic? He couldn't understand it. The pilots aligned on the citadel, diving steeply. The tanks separated from the fuselages. They fell, tumbling through the air, unaerodynamic, wobbling. They didn't whistle like bombs. They just fell. Von Aulock expected the distant clank of metal hitting rock, the sound of impact. He didn't get a clank. He saw the impact. And then, he saw the world turn orange, the color of the sun, the color of furnaces. There was no sharp explosion, a dull thump, and then a roaring whoosh, like a furnace door opening in front of a blast furnace. The tanks burst open. Hundreds of gallons of thick, sticky gel sprayed across the rocky fortifications. And the gel ignited. The fire was wrong. It didn't burn upward and vanish into the sky. It splashed. It flowed like lava across the stone. It clung to the concrete walls. It dripped into the firing slits. It rolled like burning honey down the cliff faces. Von Aulock watched the outer perimeter machine guns go silent, not because they were destroyed by blast, but because the men manning them were no longer at their positions. They were gone. This is where von Aulock's mathematics failed. The gel falling from the American aircraft was called napalm, created in laboratories at MIT, weaponized by American industrial chemistry. A chemical weapon in a new form. Not gas, not conventional explosives, but fire itself, concentrated and deployed systematically. But von Aulock didn't understand what it was. All he knew was what he saw. The fire didn't behave like normal fire. It didn't burn upward and vanish. It clung. It stuck to his concrete walls like burning tar. It dripped into his firing slits. It rolled down into his ventilation shafts. His men inside the bunkers weren't wounded by blast. They were gasping for air. They were staggering. They were collapsing. Some were running toward the doors. Some were running toward the ventilation shafts, looking for fresh air. Some were lying on the ground unconscious. One of his officers entered the command post with a report from the inner bunker. The men were suffocating. Not from burns. From suffocation. The men were unable to breathe. Von Aulock realized the horrible truth, the moment that changed everything in his mind. The ventilation shafts, designed specifically to bring fresh air from above, to keep his men alive, were now pulling in smoke. The fire outside was so intense, so hot, that it was creating a powerful vacuum. The fresh air was being replaced by thick black smoke. The men safe behind 10 feet of concrete were dying not from the fire itself. They were dying because there was no air left to breathe. They were suffocating while surrounded by the most advanced fortifications in Europe. A captain brought him another report. The men in the outer bunkers were trying to seal the vents, but the fire was too hot. It melted the metal coverings. The smoke came back in. Some men had tried to run to fresh air. They had opened the heavy steel doors, thinking fresh air would be outside. The smoke outside was thicker than inside. More men collapsed. Some had tried to fight the fire. They had poured water on it. The fire had clung to the water. It had burned on the surface of the water, spreading. Some had tried to smother it with earth. The fire had burned on top of the earth. Some had caught fire themselves. The burning gel had stuck to their uniforms. It had stuck to their skin. It would not come off. The more they tried to extinguish it, the more it burned. Von Aulock realized in that moment what his fortress had become. It wasn't a strong point anymore. It was a trap, a beautiful, well-engineered trap. built perfectly to protect against bullets and shells, built perfectly to amplify the effects of new fire, and there was nothing he could do about it. No orders, no tactics, no engineering, no solution. The report came in from the spotters. Multiple sources of fire, spreading across the entire perimeter. All perimeter positions reporting casualties. For a Prussian officer trained in the logic of fortifications since 1906, this moment was the moment when all logic ended. Von Aulock looked at the massive citadel around him, this fortress that had survived more than a week of bombardment. 8,000 shells had fallen on these walls. Artillery fire had shaken it. Bombs had fallen on it. The fortress had held. But now he understood. The Americans hadn't been trying to destroy the fortress with all those shells. They had been waiting for the right weapon, testing his defenses, learning how he would respond. And now, they had switched to a weapon that worked inside. If the next wave of P-38s dropped that liquid fire on the central ventilation intake, the main shaft that fed oxygen to the command bunker, everyone inside would be dead within minutes. His entire command staff, dead in minutes. Von Aulock realized, standing in that command post surrounded by his officers, that courage is useless against chemistry, that discipline is useless against oxygen deprivation, that German engineering, German tactics, German courage means nothing against an enemy that can weaponize the very air. He looked at the faces of his officers. They understood it too. They were trained soldiers. They understood what this moment meant. The white flag went up at approximately 4 p.m., August 17th, 1944. The fortress had held for more than a week against conventional warfare. It fell in minutes to industrial chemistry. When von Aulock marched out of the citadel, he was clean. His uniform was pressed. His monocle was in place. He marched with the bearing of a Prussian officer, chin up, eyes forward. But his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of a man who had just watched everything he believed in become obsolete in minutes. He walked past the outer bunkers. The concrete walls were blackened, not by explosion, but by heat so intense that the stone itself seemed burned. The firing slits were now just openings into shadow and ash. The equipment inside was not twisted by blast trauma. It was melted. Metal that should have been hard was now soft. Steel had become liquid. Aluminum had dripped like water. He saw the bodies being carried out on stretchers, not cut by shrapnel, not mangled by blast trauma, just still, asphyxiated, lifeless. Men who had been safe behind 10 feet of concrete. Men who had trained for years. Men who had survived worse at Stalingrad. Men who simply stopped breathing. The survivors who could walk were following him. About 605 men out of the original garrison of 3,000. Some were coughing violently. Their eyes were red, chemical burns from the napalm fumes. Many had burns on their skin where the fire had found them. They were the men who should have held to the last man. They were the elite garrison of the Atlantic Wall. They were instead walking into captivity, with nothing left but the memory of a moment when chemistry defeated engineering. Von Aulock had spent 37 years learning the science of fortification. He had earned the Knight's Cross, proving that with proper engineering and discipline, you could hold ground. He had held the Kuban bridgehead. He had held Stalingrad. He had proven that a professional soldier could hold anything. All of that knowledge was now useless, because he had learned something that no military academy had taught him. You can build a wall against an army. You can build a wall against artillery. You can build a wall against infantry assault. But you cannot build a wall against a nation that can weaponize fire itself. You cannot engineer your way out of suffocation. You cannot train against chemistry. Saint-Malo was the test. The napalm worked, better than anyone in the American High Command had predicted. Within weeks, every German general would learn what von Aulock had learned the hard way. The fortress concept, the idea that you could build a position so impregnable that no assault could penetrate it, was dead, finished, obsolete. It had died in the flames of August 17th. American engineers examined the ruins afterward. They found bunkers where equipment had literally melted, firing slits blackened as if by blowtorch, ventilation shafts turned into chimneys of death, a fortress that had been cooked from the outside in. The concept of the impregnable fortress lay in ruins. Von Aulock spent the rest of the war in a prisoner camp. He had time to think about the stone walls of Saint-Malo, Time to think about 37 years of military service. Time to think about the oak leaves he had worn for one day before surrender. Time to think about the Knight's Cross that meant nothing against chemistry. He had learned something that would define the next era of warfare. Something that would end forever, the era of fortress defense. He had learned that courage means nothing against suffocation. That concrete means nothing against an enemy who can weaponize fire itself. That engineering brilliance means nothing when the fundamental assumption that stone protects is wrong. The fall of Saint-Malo marked a turning point in modern warfare. It was proof that there is no such thing as an impregnable position anymore. There is no wall thick enough. There is no engineering clever enough. There is nothing that can protect you against a nation that has the industrial capacity to weaponize chemistry itself. Von Aulock was the first general to learn this in the starkest possible way. He would not be the last. Across Europe, fortress after fortress would fall, not to assault, but to new weapons that old soldiers did not understand. The Second World War was not being won by the side with the best soldiers. It was not being won by the side with the most courage or the most discipline. It was being won by the side that could turn industrial science into instruments of war. The side that could mass-produce not just weapons, but entire categories of warfare that didn't exist at the beginning of the conflict. Napalm, radar, jet engines, industrial capacity converted to firepower. Von Aulock had faced the reality of industrial power, and it had broken him. His fortress, the pride of the Atlantic Wall, the fortress he had sworn to hold forever, had fallen in hours. But his surrender that day had also revealed a truth that would echo through history. Industrial power defeated individual courage. Mass production defeated fortification. Chemistry defeated engineering. Strategic bombing defeated static defense. Systems defeated heroism. Organization defeated willpower. American factories defeated German fortresses. By November 1944, the Germans had completely abandoned the entire fortress doctrine. The age of impregnable strongpoints was over. The age of mobile warfare, of mechanized power, of industrial capacity deployed as firepower. That was the new reality. Thanks for watching Tales of Valor. If you found this story powerful, the moment when a professional soldier learned that courage cannot defeat chemistry, please like and subscribe for more forgotten World War II stories about how industrial power defeated individual heroism and ancient fortifications. Tell us in the comments. Had you heard of napalm being used in Europe before? Where are you watching from? What other forgotten battles or weapons would you like us to explore? Your engagement helps us continue bringing these stories to everyone who wants to understand how modern warfare truly works.